my task is easy. I'm just going to do a quick, because he sent me a short bio. I knew that there was a longer bio, but our keynote sent me a shorter bio, which I am going to read, and then we'll invite him to do his keynote. Our keynote today, we're honored. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Ebrima Sall, who's the Executive Director of Trust Africa, a Pan-African foundation and think tank that works on governance, development, and African philanthropy. He is the immediate past Executive Secretary of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, CODESTRIA, a position he held from April 2009 to June 2017. In the past as well, he has held senior positions in other institutions, including a senior research fellow at the Nordic Africa Institute in Uppsala, Sweden, and director of the Center for the Promotion of Late Savings and Credit Associations of the then Gambian Ministry of Agriculture. He was an adjunct professor in the Political Science Department of Gaston Berger University, St. Louis, Senegal. Dr. Sall is also a member of the expert group that supported the work of the International Commission on the Futures of Education set up by UNESCO, whose report, Reimagining Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education, was published in November of 2022. And he is also a current member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of UNESCO's Management of Social Transformations Program. He holds a PhD in Sociology from the University of Paris, and is the co-author or editor, single authored of several publications on the Gambia, Senegambian relations, higher education, academic freedom, and the social sciences in Africa, social movement, citizenship, governance, and the list goes on. He is a son of the Gambia and Senegal. I must confess that when I cite him in all my publications, so it is an honor for me because this is the first time I actually am meeting him in person, and I thought he was Senegalese. So he's a son of Gambia and Senegal. Dr. Sall's keynote today is titled Senegalo-Gambian Relations Revisited, Prospects and Challenges of Senegambian Integration. Thank you, Dr. Sall, for honoring us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very, very kind introduction, very kind words. Assalamu alaikum. As I say here, I am greeting you all in your names and in your surnames. That's how we greet people here in the Senegambia region. It's an honor and a great pleasure to be here today. And I'd like to thank the Senegambian Studies Group for the invitation, for the honor, and the president, Satang, and everyone else here. It's a pleasure to see Wendy again after a long time. I miss Usman Sen this morning, but he's a brother, I know he's been here. And quite a lot of people, Dr. Barry, and I'm hoping to see Dr. Sarah as well, Hassan Sall, and everyone else. As I was preparing, I'll try to make this short because it's a long day. You guys have been working very hard. And there's no PowerPoint, but just got the map over here because I think it's very important that we keep this in mind as we discuss Senegambia. The configuration is so important. But as I was preparing for this particular intervention, I spoke to a friend of mine, and I asked her what she thinks about Senegambian relations today. She's Senegalese. And she told me, well, Senegambia actually as a political project is dead, literally dead, because now nobody dares to talk about it. The Senegalese are scared of being, accused of wanting to run over Gambia, and the Gambians are so mindful of the accusation of being overly nationalistic that they too don't talk about it anymore. And that's it. So maybe one day when another leadership, probably a visionary leadership, comes into place in Gambia, then there may be a chance of the project being revived. So not in Senegal, but in Gambia, a visionary leadership in Gambia might be able to revive the project and put it in new terms, and that would make it much easier to defend. And I thought there was a point in what she was saying which was quite interesting, and there was some kind of a degree of pertinence. because there has actually been a significant degree of silence about Senegambian issues, particularly in the political debates. In 2021, Gambia organized the presidential elections. Satang has been following that, I know, Cheromar as well. But they were literally not talking about Senegambian issues, except in one instance, and it was in very negative terms. When one political party, people are spreading rumors that if you vote for the candidate of that party, you're actually putting into power somebody whose party would expel all the Senegalese from the Gambia, to draft them out of the Gambia, if they were to win the elections. And the party took it so seriously that they sent their spokesperson to Senegal to come here to explain that those were actually rumors that were they were unfounded. And the man himself said, you know what, he is married to a Senegalese himself, so it cannot possibly be true. You know? So, but it's interesting also to note that we just had elections in Senegal here less than like 3 months ago, and it was in February and March. Okay? And Senegambia was not part of the debate at all. I don't know whether anybody has had anybody talk about Senegambian issues in a very serious way in the elections in Senegal. 90-something candidates, officially, right? 90-something candidates. Initial count was actually 280 or 260 or 280 candidates. Some of them were not qualified to go ahead, and then in the end, I think M40 also went through. But none of them made it a public issue, except on one instance, and it had to do with Senegambia Bridge. If you look at the map, to move from the northern part of Senegal to go down, you cross the Gambia, at around, say, 200 kilometers to the east of Banjul. And that has been a big issue. So for a long time, you had to take a ferry to cross the river. And the crossing was tedious. You could spend a whole day there, or 2 days sometimes. And the issues, the corruption, the fighting and so on, and then, of course, during the time of Yahya Jammeh, he would just wake up and decide that he would multiply the price for the Senegalese by 2 for the vehicles. So anyway, during the elections in Senegal, there were claims that, well, one of the good things that Macky Sall did was to build the Senegambia Bridge. So it was part of the legacy of Macky Sall. The good things he did was to build the Senegambia Bridge. And that was the only instance in which they were talking about Senegambia relations in any serious way during the elections. And I think, and I've scanned through the programs of the political parties, that were, and the candidates that were running for elections. Literally, if any one of them has been discussing Gambia issues or Senegambian issues, I'm not aware. I really scanned through a number of them. I didn't see anything. I checked with friends in the Gambia also whether the main political opposition parties were talking about what is their position on Senegambia. And the response was, well, it doesn't actually really exist in the programs of most parties. So it's interesting that you have a situation in which the contenders of power are not actually talking about maybe the single most important issue that they have to deal with going forward, which is interesting. So what I will try to do in the next few minutes here in this presentation is just to go back to the key moments in the history of the relationship. What have been the main episodes and the highs and lows, and when what seemed to have worked at what particular point in time, and what are the factors explaining that. And then today, what I think we should prioritize if you want to, take this relationship forward. To begin with, there was a reference to Boubacar Bari's definition of Senegambia and Greater Senegambia. I don't know which one of the previous speakers mentioned it. Greater Senegambia is actually this, what you see in the map here. So it is beyond the confines of Gambia and Senegal, but it includes part of Mauritania, western part of Mali, Guinea-Bissau as a whole, and Gambia and Senegal, of course, and part of Guinea-Conakry. It's basically the valleys of the two rivers, Senegal and Gambia River, the river basins, plus whatever is in between them. So this is what Boubacar Bari, a great historian who is here, and I'm sure you know, calls Greater Senegambia. Now, Greater Senegambia is a social space in the sense that Henri Lefebvre, the French sociologist, calls it. It's a physical space, but it's also a space of production, for exchange, and a cultural space, a space for, therefore, of representations, including representations of the space itself. It's interesting that we're talking about cinema and film and art and so on. There is something, common in this space, but it's also the languages, it's the history, the religious, networks that run across this space. So there's something rather specific. The ethnic groups, we've heard about the Mankind. The ethnic groups are all over. Basically, the same kinds of groups you find across in different makeups. You may have more of this group here, in one part than in the other. The Mandinkas, for example, much more concentrated in the Casamance and in parts of Gambia than you find them in the rest of the space. Elsewhere, they may be called Malinke in Guinea, they may be called Bamara in Mali, but it's the same group. The Fulani are a minority everywhere. They are, about 15% of the Gambian population, 18% of Senegalese population, and then you have that makeup. But basically, it's the same groups you find around. And this is the space now that has been carved out into different, entities and countries. The fact, however, is that looking at the map, one understands why a lot of the attention has been focusing on the relationship between Gambia and Senegal more specifically. And when one reads the memoirs of many of the people who have been in power, the presidents, Abdou's memoirs or Jawara's memoirs, or even Hassan Diallo's book on Journey for Justice. Hassan Diallo was a minister of justice in Gambia when Jawara was the president. And then he later spent time in Arusha as prosecutor of the Special Tribunal for Rwanda, and is now Chief Justice in Gambia again. These memoirs are quite interesting. So they all refer to the period of the Senegambian Confederation, for example, and to other aspects of the history. One can see or have a feeling that there's a certain amount of frustration for, at the level of many of them, and a feeling of failure, that this thing that made so much sense didn't happen or it didn't survive. So there is something that everybody felt need to happen between the two countries, which really didn't happen. Because it seems, it made sense, it is logical. It's actually Jagan Senghor's work on Senegambia. The title of his doctoral thesis was on the logical basis for integration between the two countries. I think there are also other attempts around the area, because Senegal and Mali formed a federation at one point. It didn't last long, and there were no further attempts to revive it. And the French played a key role in making sure that it sort of broke down. Right? De Gaulle was openly against it, the Mali Federation, in his statements. Unlike the Senegambia issue, where it kept coming up, the first time was during the colonial period when British and the French tried to swap territories so that there will be continuity. They considered different places so that France wanted to control the whole area and propose different places to the British to take over so that they would have the Senegambia area to themselves. When that didn't happen, they began pushing to make it feel, the British feel that, look, there's no point in staying on in Gambia because it's just so small. And the British wouldn't go away. And in part because there was also a constituency for it in the Gambia itself, the traders and the traditional chiefs. There's a famous letter of a chief called Toumani Bojang, who wrote to the British when he heard that they were considering leaving the place to the French so that it will become French territory. And then, of course, what was very significant is the fact that with all those attempts, it didn't happen. They were not succeeding. The second most important moment was around the time of independence, decolonization, when on the one hand there were doubts about the viability of Gambia as an independent state, because it is small. It's one of the smallest, countries with the smallest land area on mainland Africa. And among the islands, some which are a bit smaller, but on the continent, it is one of the smallest, if not the smallest. At the same time, too, Senegal sort of, had this desire of, going back to the idea of a unified territory. So the idea of a union between the two countries, or a federation, is something that remained appealing. And so the issue kept coming. It came up again later on now, when every time there's a crisis, right? In 1981, an attempted coup, No, 1980 attempted coup, 1981 a coup actually that succeeded, but that was reversed, and the president brought back with the help of the Senegalese, and then they formed the Senegambian Confederation that had specific objectives, and then it collapsed after 6 years or 7 years or so, 1982 to 1989, and then of course when Jammeh came, it was another story altogether. And the most recent experience, which is quite interesting, I'll come back to it later on, is what happened in 2016 when the Gambians voted Jammeh out. He considered defeat and then changed his mind after 1 week, claiming that the elections were rigged, and therefore he was contesting the results. And it was a big crisis. And then this time Senegal came back, but with ECOWAS, as part of the ECOWAS thing, and that succeeded, and it went well. And the ECOWAS troops are still there in Gambia until today. So the difference in terms of what happened in 1981, 82, and what happened in 2016 is interesting, and I think it's something that is from which we can draw important lessons. I think there are several reasons why it would be advantageous to have some kind of an integration. Not only at the level of the two countries, but also in the larger region. And the main advantages are actually quite obvious. It will be, of course, easier to move for the people who are moving around, same groups, same networks. It's easier for them, to be able to settle where they want to settle, or where they can settle and make a living. It is easy. It will mean pooling resources for development, having a larger pool of resources, and a larger market, of course. Mobility and communications will be much easier for everyone. Definitely between the north and south of Senegal, it's much easier. And then, of course, the political fragmentation will be lessened. You have the problems in the southern part of the country, schisms, of course, which is sort of facilitated by the fact that there is a feeling of isolation because of the fact that Gambia runs, and sort of separates the north from the south. And together, the two countries would, of course, be a much stronger voice on the international scene. So what is interesting is when one looks at the cost of non-integration. The costs of non-integration are actually quite significant. The geographical isolation of Casamance has been a factor in the fact that there has been some political unrest and fighting in the south and claims for independence. Mobility has been difficult. You take the road. Before the bridge was constructed, it was a hassle. Now you take the boat, and what that means, and including when you had a disaster. The largest maritime disaster in history happened actually off the Gambian coast when the Jola sank, and that was really a drama. And of course, the fact that you have different currencies, different policies, different administrative cultures creates a whole lot of problems. And then, of course, what happens is people take advantage of it. Also, business persons take advantage of it. Ordinary people take advantage of it. So they move to, buy commodities where they're cheaper and easier to get. They sell their commodities where they fetch higher prices. So a lot of smuggling has been going on. And at one point, the Gambia was operating what they were calling a re-export strategy with the support of the IMF. What that re-export strategy meant was you import as much as you can from the world market, and then you let it filter into the region. So officially you're importing it, and then people manage to take it out somehow. And it is a strategy. And it was a very clever strategy. You got them foreign exchange and so on. But it frustrated the items' efforts to industrialize in Senegal. They were trying to build a textile industry. They were building sugar refineries and other, and flour mills in Senegal as well. So those efforts were frustrated by the fact that cheap commodities were coming from different places. And through Gambia, then, so the tension between the two countries was regular and frequent. Now, that has changed with liberalization. You don't have the differences in tariffs now. You have currency differences, but the taxes are quite similar. You have liberal tax regimes in both places. The other major cause for non-integration, of course, are the security issues, the security challenges that the countries are facing, including the fact that you could easily mount something and want to take over power in Gambia when you need it. So for the Gambia, the risk also is a risk of isolation because it is sufficient for the Senegalese to decide that they are making it more difficult for people to move around. And actually what has been happening is that the trade unions have been occasionally just deciding to block the communication routes so that transport will not move into Senegalese territory because the tariffs have changed on one side or because they think they are not, they're the ones who have to control the space. So we've got a lot of reasons why all those things needed to be corrected. Now, I think what I want to say very quickly is that some of the things that have been in this debate all along are quite a number, but three are very important. One is the issue of sovereignty. Second one is the issue of security. I'll come back to it again. Not only the military security, but also the human security issues. And the third one is, of course, the whole problem of transformation and development. These are both countries that are struggling with underdevelopment and that they want to change. Now, sovereignty, from the time of independence, people fought for independence or struggled for it. And so as they want determining what happens in their own countries, they want to determine what policies to implement, what choices to make, and that's so being sovereign states was a major concern for both countries. It still is an issue in the discussions now. And it's in the name of sovereignty that actually the struggle against the Senegambian Confederation was waged. Basically, it was felt that when the Senegalese army helped President Jawara, who was overthrown in 1981, to come back to power, and they negotiated and set up a confederation on those conditions, the terms were not properly negotiated because it was an unequal relationship, and it reflected in the relationship that was established then. And the simple illustration of that is the fact that the president of the confederation had to be Senegalese, and even when the official president traveled, the Gambian president couldn't act, as acting president while the other one was away, and that was used, effectively by the people in the country to say, you see, we have a president who cannot even act as a president, so the issues of sovereignty were very, very important here. And it actually fueled Gambian nationalism, in a very big way. In a sense, whenever you had a tension of sorts between Senegal and Gambia, the nationalist feelings, of course, grew, very, very, very much and became very strong in the context of the Gambia. Now, when the discussions about Gambian independence were being made, the UN, became involved and they facilitated the mission to see how the Cameroonians worked it out. And the Anglophone Cameroon and Francophone Cameroon came together to form one country. And then they, came back, mission made recommendations. But of course, the Gambians settled for the most flexible option, which was just an entente cordiale and not go for anything like a union or a confederation. In 1981-82, because of the situation in which they accepted confederation as a step towards a higher form of integration. But in the end, I think when the regime felt a bit more secure, they began dragging their feet, and I think, and Abdou says so in his memoirs, he decided to, just to cancel the whole thing because he realized that the confederation wasn't working. And he did it in a very humiliating way because he didn't even tell Jawara that the soldiers, Senegalese soldiers who were, guarding him, were told to stop without Jawara being notified that they were going to stop. And that happened when there was a crisis in the whole region, tension with Mauritania, tension with Guinea-Bissau, between Senegal and these countries. And then it was the time when Jawara chose to ask for the rotation of the presidency between the two countries so that he will also be able to act as a president at some point. And so they thought it was too much and they cancelled it. But I think the second important thing and why the sovereignty issues keep coming up is that something happened with the creation of states in this region. I think when you had a state in the Gambia and a state in Senegal, around which you had policies being framed that are intervening over space, policing a space, policing people, in the sense that Foucault is using the term, then you begin having something happening, and people's loyalties began changing. So groups that, in the same village, we have instances in which the border literally runs through a village, you know, or in the same space where we have the same ethnic group, you know, and then, but they begin to be having to respond to demands from the state on one side and not to the state on the other side. And the communities played on those things by having several identity cards. We find many people who have 2 or 3 identity cards, which is a way of coping with that thing. So, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, people knew that they were you know, answerable to a particular government and an administration that collected taxes, that, you know, made demands on them, and not to the other one. That's one. Secondly, the elites, you know, also will definitely were influenced by their former colonial administrations in terms of administrative culture and elite cultures. But the fact that you had a state, and this is one thing that happened, you know, the modern state that came to us through the encounter with Europe was actually universalized as an institutional form. And again, Henri Lefebvre has written actually a 4-volume book called the State Mode of Production. It is the one kind of institution that is really literally very little contested, and there is very little innovation in terms of state forms around the world. So that form has been established in our context, and it helped in establishing, you know, identities and consolidating identities. And actually, one of the big issues that we have to deal with, and I'm coming to that in a minute, is the fact that we have internalized the colonial boundaries in a big way, and that is one of the biggest obstacles to integration on the continent today. The second thing I think which I mentioned, which has been very important in the relationship, is are the security issues. The military issues are very obvious. You've got now, particularly now with terrorist movement and jihadism all around. Here in Senegal, people talk about sleeping groups, sleeping movements that are just waiting for an opportunity to, you know, to express themselves. And once in a while, you hear somebody arrested because they've said something or they seem to be sympathizing with these terrorist groups. But I think those issues become important when there's a context for them. And the context is the critical, very critical human security issues, problems of livelihoods, you know, joblessness for the young people, the impact of the environmental damage that has happened in the region. We watched this film on the pirogue. It's an excellent film, you know. But the context in which it is actually one of desperation for all these young people. This is the region that sort of sends out as many young people as one can imagine, risking their lives, you know, across the desert and the seas. You know, of course, in East Africa they have similar issues. People trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. But what people should know is that among the groups in Italy, immigrant communities in Italy, Gambians are overrepresented, because a large number of them are taking these boats and going. You know. So those human security issues are very, very important. And I think it's one reason why finding a way of coming together to address the big challenges becomes very, very important for everyone in the region. The third one, of course, is the need to transform. We have to come together. They will deal with development issues in a much more important way, in complementarity, and of course and dealing with the big infrastructure problems as well. Now, here is where there has to be probably some deeper thinking in terms of the development model, because both countries now are running. We'll see what the PASTEF government will do. They are saying in their program, Jomai President program, or PASTEF, no, the party's program, that they want to do something completely new that doesn't correspond to anything that people have seen before. All this ism, socialism, capitalism, and everything. They're going to do something new. We will see what it is. The fact of the matter is the dominant system we are living under is the neoliberal system. Yeah. And neoliberalism breeds inequality, which is what is at the heart of these problems that these young people are facing, and the exclusion and marginalization that people are confronting in so many different places. And I think so long as that problem is not addressed, we will have a difficulty in getting a system that works. Let me go to the third and last section of this presentation, so I'll just keep it reasonably long. I think what happened in in 2016. What happened in 2016 with the, post-electoral crisis, when Jammeh decided not to go and Senegal came back in, they came this time, first of all, not alone, but as part of ECOWAS, which was very important. Number two, they responded to a demand from the Gambian people, because people wanted Jammeh to go. And it was interesting what happened in Gambia in 2016, between December and January 17 when he left. All the groups mobilized, groups that one had never heard of saying anything political. One of the characteristics of Gambian civil society actually was it's almost like non-political, nature. Tango, the association of NGOs and all the civil society groups, we have very silent on non-political issues. Even the political ones that are closest to political issues, like the Center for Human Rights and human rights organizations, we are not saying much, during all the years of Jammeh and even before. Now everybody was getting up. They were all making statements saying, Jammeh, you've lost the elections, you should go. So that was really a defining moment in the history of the country. So the intervention corresponded to what actually people were demanding for. It supported, a demand from within the country. And that made a huge difference, which is why there was no resentment to the arrival of these troops into the country. And which is why they could stay actually as long as they are still there now, and one doesn't have any major issues until now. And I think that just raises a big issue. The second thing in relation to that, which I think for us is important and going forward, is the fact that because it is ECOWAS, you don't have the sort of vis-a-vis type of relationship you have when you have only two countries talking, right? Senegal and Gambia. The difference is in size of the territory, of the populations, the economic, GNP and everything. It's just so huge that it's very easy for one to feel that, look, they are either the big one or the small one in a relationship that's very unequal. When it is in a larger context, it makes it easier to negotiate and to have terms that are more acknowledging of the different kinds of demands of each one. Which I think brings us back to the notion of a greater Senegambia. My argument is that for the future, we have to take that issue of a larger Senegambian entity beyond the confines of the two countries much more seriously. Either including all the countries around, and we've got illustrations of that. You have the Gambia River Basin Development Project, the OMVG, that includes Guinea, Conakry, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, and Senegal. On the north, you have OMVS, the Senegalese River Basin Development Project, that brings together Mauritania, Mali, Senegal, and Guinea. And they're doing very well. So the bridge was built as part of the OMVG projects. So when it is functional, it has to do with very concrete issues. They do a number of things together. At the bilateral level, certain things have been happening which are also quite interesting. For example, Senelec of Senegal, the Senegalese electricity company, has been supplying electricity to provincial towns in Gambia and to the large villages close to the border for a long time. There is cooperation between civil society organizations, and by the way, when the Gambia was experiencing the dictatorship for 22 years under Yahya Jammeh, Senegalese civil society was very supportive. Everybody running from Gambia had to go through Senegal. They hosted them, they supported them. So that was really, really very, very important. And it's the same relationship that existed between Macky Sall and Barrow at one point as well. So the point here is to say that I think we need to go back to the larger framework and also base it on a number of initiatives that are very concrete, that correspond to what people really need in terms of the aspirations and the changes that they want to see happen in the region. The final point I want to make in relation to that is that, again, we have to bring in issues that maybe we should look beyond the confines of the integration problematic to be able to be innovative. I think we need to think outside of the box really, which means we should look at what's happening elsewhere, on the one hand, in terms of integration projects. If you take the case of the European Union, of course the small states of Europe also have issues, but of a different kind, right? You have all these smaller ones, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, you have Luxembourg, which is even smaller still. None of them is thinking of leaving Europe. None of them is feeling that they are being swallowed because there are a number of issues that make it possible for them to be in that kind of setup. I think we can present the problems of integration in our context also in ways that, on condition that some critical issues are addressed, issues having to do with the conditions of living of the people, which is where I'm thinking that we need to take issues of transformative social policy, for example, very seriously. And there are different models of integration, and it's not all about what one can do with the market when you come together in a collective. So thinking, in new ways and thinking about alternative ways of organizing the economy and of addressing the challenges of livelihood is important if we want to make sure that, we create the conditions for people to be able to, come together on new terms and be certainly and especially forward-looking. We know that by the year 2040, this continent will be the one that will be concentrating the largest number of young people in the world, and it will be basically 1 out of every 4 people you meet on planet Earth will be coming from this continent. The populations of Senegal and Gambia will increase in a dramatic way, and the answers to the demands of the young people will be even much more pressing, more important than is happening now. The government that has been elected in Senegal is a government that was brought to power largely thanks to the actions of the young people. And they're saying they have now the youngest president. It's not the youngest president, but it's the youngest elected president that we have on the continent. The one in Burkina Faso is much younger, but he came with the guns. Okay? So the point here is that we have certain things happening, and those things are not likely to change. They are structural issues. What we are not looking at, I think, sufficiently are the systems to put in place that will make sure that the slogan of the Sustainable Development Goals is to leave nobody behind. To leave nobody behind, we have to change ways. Because the way things are going now, if they continue, a lot of people will still be left behind and will not be ending the challenges that we are faced with now. I just want to end there and say once again, thank you very much for the opportunity for being here. Thank you for your patience, because I've taken a lot of time. I think there is hope in the sense that, again, the government that has been elected in Senegal is a Pan-African, sort of movement. PASTEF is Pan-Africanist. It's actually Parti Africain. They are reconnecting with a tradition that was there before. There was a time when all the major political parties of this continent were African parties. If you go to Southern Africa, they were all African parties of sorts. The ANC, ZAPU, ZANU, they were all African National Party, African Party of something. In West Africa, you had the PAIs, Parti Africain, something. PASTEF is reconnecting with that tradition, it seems. Okay? And in PASTEF, one of the constituent members of the PASTEF coalition, or the coalition that brought Joma to power, is actually Sheikh Anta Diop's party. And Sheikh Anta Diop is one of the greatest Africans who has theorized and argued for and fought for the Federation of African States. So there is hope. We just have to see how they try to translate it into actual practice and policies. But I'm hoping that we'll also have in Gambia a move, and in the rest of the region, by the way, a move that will enable us to move forward. I am not sure whether the alliance of states that has been formed by the military guys, of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali is the answer. I am damn not convinced at all. I'm not convinced. What we have seen of military rule, I have learned to be suspicious whenever I see them coming. But I think the ECOWAS option, ECOWAS also needs to be reinvented completely. To come back to our Senegambia, I think there is hope. We cannot but be hopeful, and I'm hoping that we'll also see this movement of Pan-Africanism and progressive Pan-Africanism, because you have a very liberal Pan-Africanism as well, but progressive Pan-Africanism taking root in our sub-region as well. and that may lead to a new type of Senegambia. And that will definitely be forward looking at much more responsive to the demands of the young people of today. Let me just leave it at that, and thank you again for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sall, for that very insightful. I know it was a longer keynote. We appreciate the cliff notes, and we hope to perhaps see the published piece soon as well. I wouldn't attempt to summarize Dr. Sall's keynote, but I think just to re-echo, I think the call for all of us, especially as scholars in the room that work on Senegambia, especially thinking about out-of-the-box, innovative ways of thinking about integration of the Senegambia, beyond Senegal and Gambia. And I think that's a call for all of us as well. I know we are almost at the end, and I just wanted to, with Dr. Sall's permission, perhaps open the floor quickly and see whether we have a couple of questions, comments. I know it's late in the day. And we also, just to say thank you as well to colleagues that have joined online. I know there are quite a number of them online as well. We appreciate your presence as well. Any comments, questions? Yes?
First of all, thank you for a really amazing keynote speech. And I just wanted to ask a sort of couple of follow-up questions based on what you said. The first one is, we hear a lot of talk about sort of integration from above, this sort of state integration, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on sort of integration from below, or like popular integration. And I ask this because I did a lot of interviews in rural eastern parts of Gambia and Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. I would ask people specifically about this issue of like state integration. And most people were opposed to it for two main reasons. The first of which was the ability to profit or mitigate suffering because of economic differentials. And the second reason was, as we saw in 2016 when Yahya Jammeh refused to leave office, and about 100,000 or so Gambians left for Senegal and things like that, many people in greater Senegambia had the experience of unfortunate political rule, and the ability to move to another state is a real way to mitigate that sort of challenge. So I was just curious, your thoughts on this sort of top-down versus bottom-up integration.
Yeah. Okay. Should we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Sall. I have a difficult task tomorrow. I think I'm one of the first to present on exactly something similar to what you just said. My colleague mentioned about interviews with people at the border. You'd be surprised to realize that when you interview people on integration, they will speak only about the top level. They will never mention about the bottom level. Because the bottom level is a natural integration.
Yes.
The people move across borders. They don't see borders. They recognize borders. And this is the point I think also I wanted to raise here. Is there any possibility for cultural integration? For socio-cultural integration? Because that seems to work.
Yeah.
I mean, if you come to the borders of Gambia and Senegal, because of the proximity in everything, in the religion, culture, the languages they speak, everything, the attires, you don't even distinguish them. You go to certain villages, they have Senegalese and Gambians living in the same village, with double nationalities. So they don't sense a distinction of Gambia and Senegal. They live in a Senegambia. So probably there is already an opportunity for integration. Probably, but when you ask them about integration, the first thing they think about is the differences. They see the distinction. They see the separation of states. Because they don't see themselves now as part of that integration. They are already integrated. So now the question is, you're talking about the possibility of Pan-Africanism. Because the whole issue is there any chance of integration really at political level? That's a very big question we need to ask. Because the differences seem to be so apparent, so powerful, that sovereignty and state seem to keep dividing us. But naturally, if I come to Senegal, everybody is my worker. If Senegalese come to Gambia, we practically share everything. We're always joyous to see each other and live together. Then what is the problem? Maybe that is probably the bigger question I'd like to throw to you before tomorrow, so I can get some food.
It's
seems like
Okay,
we
okay.
have the same question.
Yeah, because we're not gonna do a manner where we only take,
Yes.
questions. So my sister
I'll
Mara.
just add to what he said, because that was my question. What is happening in the community level? Because, for example, somebody like me from Kaolack, part of my family is from the Gambia. We don't distinguish as Gambians and Senegalese. They're just our family who are different borders. So we don't question any of those coming from the top. So what do we do? How do we mobilize that?
Can I answer those ones? Then we take more afterwards if you have time. Okay, no, thank you very much. I think these are great questions, so all three of you. From below, of course, yes, you are right. There are two processes. There is what is happening at the interstate level. I referred to it somehow by saying, look, at the border, people have different ID cards. In a sense, I'm sure you guys are familiar with James Scott's work, Weapons of the Weak, Domination and the Arts of Resistance and all those things. People fight back in the way they can. The moral economy is different completely. So at the level of the people, the connections are still very strong. It's the same serines and marabouts who exist everywhere, including at the top, by the way. When Adama Barrow was elected, Adama Barrow went to thank the Marabout of Touba for having prayed for him. So you have the religious networks are there, the economic networks, social networks, family ties, they are still very strong. Okay? But here's the story. You know, we are in this country, in Senegal. It's a Muslim country. Gambia is a Muslim country. Mauritania and Mali, and most of them majority Muslims. What happens when people want to decide on when to start fasting or ending their fasting, or we just had the Eid? Yeah. Every country has its national commission for moon sighting. Okay? Yes, every country has one. And the interesting thing is they all will hold their meetings and they say, we have checked across the entire national territory and we haven't seen the moon, or we have seen it. None of them says, we haven't seen it, but the Gambians have seen it, but the Mauritanians have seen it. And isn't that interesting? So they've become completely national in their posture. You listen to how the Marabouts pray. They begin praying, they don't pray for the Ummah of Islam. They first pray for Swin Senegal, or Swin Gambia. Everybody is their country first. Okay? So something has happened to us. And that's the point I'm making. You know? The connections are there when you sit and think and rationalize, or spontaneous on some levels. But people have internalized the divisions in a way that is actually becoming a problem. You know, when people have two prayer times, Gambia prayed on the 16th on Sunday. This week, last weekend on Sunday, 16th, Eid El Kabir was in Gambia. In Senegal, it's a Monday. And yet on Saturday, everybody fasted because they said Arafat, and that's the Arafat is Eve of the thing. Everybody in the whole world fasted because they agreed that was the day for Arafat. And then you have prayer here on Sunday, in Gambia on Sunday. In here, they said, no, they haven't seen the moon. They have not seen the moon. Therefore, they wait for Monday to do it. They don't say, but Gambians have seen it. If the Casamance people have seen it, they would have broken, they would have did it on the same. But this is the reality of the fact that the borders have taken root. And that is even worse at the level of the elites. So we do have issues at that level, and I think it's really, really, really important that we consider that. Otherwise, you're right. We have the same family networks. We have, people marry across, they settle there. What you do have also is, because the economic base is what it is, in Gambia in particular, this is something I've, from the time I was going to school, I've been seeing, and it's still going on. They will just decide one day that they're going to round all the foreigners and ask them whether they have paid their residential permit. Residential permits, you are an ECOWAS citizen, you are living here. Some of them have been here, born to grandparents who have been living here, and still, if you have not paid your residential permit, you can be rounded up and kept at the police station until you pay. It's a shame. Because it's a way of making money, it's a racketeering thing also, because they are getting money from the officers who are doing it. But it also speaks to the mentality of the fact that you can be a foreigner. And citizenship is one of the single also important problems that we still have not resolved on this continent. Because you can be in a place for as long as you can, you might one day just wake up to be told that, look, actually, by the way, your grandfather doesn't come from here. The Ivorians theorize it under the Bédier thing until in the name of Ivorite, defining different levels and thresholds of being Ivorian. You know, les Ivoiriens, multiséculaires, les Ivoiriens, so different levels. And so you could be there for as long as you can imagine, but because you have foreign origins or your grandparents, it becomes very important in terms of issues like access to land, you know, and those issues of citizenship are still really, really very critical. They are unresolved, you know, with all the mingling that is going on and the networks that exist, you know, particularly now when there is the land is becoming, you know, scarcer and scarcer, and the competition for it is becoming keen. And by the way, there's a moratorium on land, you know, sales around the coast in Senegal here, because it's been alienated in a big way. There's land grabbing being done by the elites in particular. And they are taking the lands of farmers, they're taking the lands of, you know, of urban dwellers, you know, and alienating it. But when it comes to access to land, even in the rural areas is where one can tell you, no, those farms were the farms of my great-grandparents. You know, this village came, you settled there because the farms belong to our great-grandparents. You know, so they are just loaned, you know, lent to you people to use. So there are problems like that we still haven't quite sorted out yet. And so I think the thing to do is to get the two dynamics to speak to one another. Right? What's happening at the grassroots level. And the one who should adapt is actually the state structures that should be adapted, you know, to speak to the living conditions and the way people are, you know, are operating and functioning. You know, otherwise it becomes a you know, a mismatch, you know, and it's actually easier to operate at that level, you know. So yeah, I think that's what I would say in answer.
Okay. So one more question, and I think Maram still wants a question.
No,
oh,
I'm a person to what you're saying.
Oh, okay. I thought you had an additional question. My bad. Yeah. So we'll take Lamin and then we'll wrap it up. I know it's late in the day. Thanks.
I wonder if we will have a choice whether to integrate or not based off of the sort of environmental crises that these states are facing. Like when I think about Gambia and I think about flooding and just like by 2050, like what will happen in Gambia will be so severe that I wonder how the Gambian state itself will, whether it will collapse, how it will function. And then if you think about just drought and all of these things, sometimes I wonder if there is any other option, really. Like, and no,
yeah, of course, I agree. I think integration is a must. Okay, yes. I think integration is a must. I think it's a question of when it happens and how it happens. Okay. In other words, the terms in which we make it happen. You see, one of the problems, and I think the blame here really should be on the African elites, you know, who really find it very difficult to focus on the big picture and settle for what is good for everyone. Because we still have the tendency of thinking that, okay, you can work your things out by allying with this other power here or with that other power here. These days, it's easy for them to say, well, you know what, because the West is messing up, you better go with the Russians or you will do it with China, you know. The environmental issues are critical. The problems of these young people is probably even more critical because they have no patience and they are not willing to be sitting down and just watching things, you know, continuing to happen the way they do. The desperation now is taking them across the ocean, but I think sooner or later it will become obvious that that's not the way to go. So coming together is definitely the only thing to do. But again, I think we should be, you know, Cabral used to say, we have to learn to think with our own heads in our own context, okay? You know, and decolonial thing, we have to be looking at the world from where we are. So where are we in the Senegambian context? What are the issues that we have to deal with? We put our heads together and figure out what can work for us. You know, I think that is the challenge. What can work for us, and just really very realistic about what the issues and what the options are. Gambia will disappear if we sit and watch, or we think that we can, you know, work it out on our own. We don't need to work with Senegal or work with the other countries around. At the end of the day, it's such a low-lying country. You know, it's 50 centimeter rise in sea level. We are gone. You know, before then, you know, there's just so much happened. Every time you have a crisis anywhere, you know, we feel the effects in a big way. So I think we are condemned to think really hard about ways of fixing this, and doing so with really a deliberate effort to make sure that it is not a question of scoring points or outsmarting one another, you know, but creating the conditions that can, you know, secure our future, basically. Yeah. And I think that's the thing for Africa as a whole. When they say Agenda 2063, that beautiful vision, it makes so much sense. But the roads they're taking, often you wonder whether they are likely to take us there. You know. So anyway, that's me.
On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Sall, for the keynote, but I think beyond that, for truly embodying the Senegambian spirit, for showing us that we should and can question the status quo. But I think, at least for me, most particularly as well, just inspiring us that in our work, whether that's research, whether that's teaching, whether that's advocacy, that it should be relevant to our communities, and in this context, Senegambia. We do have two small gifts. One, I'll hand it over to our president, Emily, to share and give Dr. Sall our conference goodie.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I also have a signed copy for you for the Gambian transition towards a new constitutional order. And obviously you are cited in the book, so please read it. I know you've read it. Yes, but again, thank you everybody, those online, but also for you as well. And we'll see you bright and early tomorrow at 9:30.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.